I am of the pure mind of God. I am the resurrection and the life in my body, my finances, my relationships, and my world. I qualify everything in my world with perfection. I am perfection. I am this perfect day, and the life that lives in me is the light that cannot fail. I accept only God's perfection, His good, in my outer circumstances. I know in my heart that God is all in all. I am absolutely not concerned about what happens, because I know wonderful things are happening now. Well, good day. It is a good day, that's for sure. Oh my God, this is the time of year that I love the most. You know, spring going into summer, I just love it. Because everything starts to come back to life. People start hanging out. Places get busy. I'm talking outdoor places. You know, especially here around the pier. It's really the time of year that brings a lot of joy to most people. And so being totally clairsentient, I pick up all these vibrations. When people are feeling joy, it just makes it that much easier for me just to ride the wave. Ride the joy. Hello. So, what I want to talk about today has to do with that. How you need to fight and protect your joy. Because that is the proof that you're in the will of God. Your joy is the proof that you're in the will of God. And see, okay, I just want to say this quick before I make a quick break here. Your joy is the proof that you're in the will of God. Your gratitude is the recognition of that fact. All right, think about that. And you see, when you discern the divine blessing in the immediate moment, you find joy. Now, I want to talk about that specifically. Those three things you should contemplate. You should think about those keys. They'll unlock a whole new level of spiritual comprehension for you. All right, now, after this break, I'm going to break it down. All right, so we're going to get into territory that is really going to be risque, and I got to go there because this is all being channeled. You've never heard this before. I've never heard this before. But I have a direct hotline to a different realm, all right? I see through things that only a divine insight can offer, all right? Now, here's the idea. Because I know that everything is the dielectric and it's the tension between the polarizing opposites, and because I know that the spin-off of that dielectric creates the residue of material consciousness, which is the fallen state of man, the Adam dream, and because I know that everything in the natural, which is the fallen state of man, the counterfeit dream, is a artificial substrate of the truth, which means it's counterfeiting what actually is into a realm of what actually is not. In other words, you're living in a smokescreen, a delusion of sense. Now, the reason why the churches, as you would call them, and all of the institutions are so against the sexual nature, all right? The sexual nature of mankind. I called it electricity squared years ago, channeled that, and what I want to talk to you about is more about this electricity squared. We're going to go there today. You are, in essence, God's orgasm, God's pleasure, God's release of tension between the polarizing opposites where everything is in bliss. You are God's bliss. Bliss is God's orgasmic nature, bliss. Counterfeiting that is the sensual 5 sense pleasure of the carnal satisfaction that you get when you have a orgasm, sexually speaking. Now, that is what humans lust for. They lust for money, fame, power, orgasms, more sex, more drugs, more food, more, because there's nothing there. The nature of want means that it lacks, and the nature of the artificial substrate is that it emerges from the state, the resonance of lack and want. Now, those are electrical terms: state, frequency, resonance, amperes, voltages. All right. Well, being in flow state allows me to see things as a non-attached observer. So what I recognize is that in the human realm, you long for relationship. You long for intimacy. Well, what is the progression of that? The progression of that leads to the union between two souls and the dielectric expulsion, the creative impulse of life becoming the explosion, right, of antimatter, matter, the convolution of dielectric poles creates this cosmic stardust that you call your existence in flesh. It's a dream, but it really is the propensity of that creative impulse having its bliss. You are God's bliss. Even the words say everything. Jesus came into being. All right? You know, you use those words intimately speaking. You use the words come and came, and you use these words. But you don't know why you use these words. I am come that they may have life and have it more abundantly. Well, it's giving you a tell. It's telling you how to find your way home. Now, they don't want you to know this. That's why they suppress this in the religious communities. And they say that these are all taboo topics. Keep these in the bedroom. It's between you and your lover. And remember that adultery is when you experience these pleasures with someone who is not your partner. Great. Well, think about what that means to God. Adultery is when you long for in your heart the bliss of another partner. In other words, you know, when I have that 100 million, oh my God, I'm going to feel so complete. Or when I get that lover, I am going to feel so satisfied with life. Or, you know, when I finally get out of this sick body, I'm going to feel so good again. I'm going to feel so good again. So what you do is you start longing for another lover, another partner. And that partner is the carnal mind itself. And so you become seduced by this Delilah spell that cuts off your hair, your spiritual power. And then you begin to long for her. You begin to long for her and her desires. She dangles them in front of you as the good of this world. And the lack of her desires, she dangles as the bad of this world. But they're ultimately all of her seduction. It is her ways that go down to the pits of hell, the states of reasoning. Because for you to fall into that temptation, into the Delilah spell, you have to sacrifice the fact that I am come into being, which means that you are the Son of God. Think about the whole nature of the intimate process that leads to developing a child. So first, there is relating, okay? First, there is relating. Second, there is intimacy. Now, I'm not talking about like rape and these other human carnal deviations from a divine principle. Okay, I'm talking about the natural, spontaneous flow of bringing a child into existence, as you say. There's relating, there's intimacy, there's intercourse, then there's pleasurable bliss. Okay? And in that pleasurable bliss, that fleeting poof, that fleeting cosmic bang, the Big Bang Theory, they must be laughing because they sold you the Big Bang Theory, because it's a big bang going on. Yes, and you came into being. So you came into being. Who are you and who is being? And where did you come into being? These are the big questions you have to really get straight so that you can be in God's bliss. Because if you're not in God's bliss, then you're not the Son of God. Now, think about it. If you are not in God's bliss, which means God came into being, and if you aren't the result of that bliss, in other words, if you're not radiating that back, because like equals like father, like son, like descendant, son means descendant. So if you're not radiating joy out of your heart back to the Father, joy is your compass, right? If you're not radiating joy back to the Father, and joy is the immediate discernment of the blessing in this moment, okay? If that's not you, then you are often the pleasures and treasures of this world, which are false gods, and they bring about suffering. The consequence of those pleasures is always pain, because that is the seductress taking you down into the pit of hell. And her good is no good. And her lack of good is no evil, because there is no lack of good and there is no evil. Ultimately, you'll recognize that there is no her. There is no world of form. When I look at the zero, I see nothing. Remember I told you transmissions ago that the waxy ball is in plain sight? They put a zero in front of you, and they said, here's the shape of the world. And they said, you live in it, which means they subconsciously pegged you inside of a zero. And when I look through the zero, I see the world. There is no world out there. I'm sorry to tell you this, but you did not come into being in the flesh, because nothing came into being in the flesh. There is no arousal from God. There is no cause, as I told you in the last video. There's no cause. There was no relating between God and another creation. There is no intimacy between spirit and matter. And there certainly was no pleasure that derived a child in anything that you call material. And so there is no life in that zero. And yet you observe all of it, and you seek for the pleasure and the arousal of it. And then you give it names like, oh, I'm getting dopamine, or oh, I'm getting an endorphin rush, or oh, I'm getting a high today. And these are nothing. These are counterfeit. That's why they always require more, because they leave you empty every time. The true sign of an addiction is that it leaves you feeling empty when its presence is no longer available. Now, is it possible that God's presence can be no longer available anywhere in his creation? And if God is the only one that came into being, and the joy of the Lord is the true relating, it is the true intimacy, it is the true pleasure of God. Are you not supposed to be that pleasure, that descendant, that child? Yes, you are. And so when you say, what is the fastest path to my joy in this moment? And you ask and answer the question, and you take that action, what it does is it automatically pops the bubble of whatever trouble has been plaguing your five senses and reveals the true nature of God's allness. Or it begins to orchestrate the lesson that is required within that moment, which becomes the immediate blessing. And as you discern that that is the blessing, then you get the joy behind it. So either way, it leads from joy to joy to joy, because the cause, there is a cause. Remember, I told you in the last video, there is a cause in joy, and joy leads to the consequence of more joy. Assuming you have laid down the pleasures and treasures of this world, and you have made the one, the allness of the presence within, the only joy, by reflecting the state of being as the goal of goals, not chasing the treasures. If you say, well, only when I get $1 million in my wallet or my bank account or under my pillow, I will then give joy back to this world. I am sorry to tell you, but that is not it. You have made a counterfeit God your adulteress, and you are now committing adultery with the Lord. You are to be married to the bride. You are the bride of Christ. You are the bride of Christ. You are the love of God. You are the bliss that God bring into reality. God came into being and you showed up. Now everything is about honor. Everything is about favor. When I honor the Lord by deciding that his creation is good enough, because it is the only creation, and right where I stand is holy ground. Therefore, my next step ought to be, what is the fastest path to my joy in this moment for the fact of expressing joy, regardless of what the picture on the outside looks like? And I do that. I have left the full care and concern of all of my needs to the Father, which means I trust. And therefore, that performance contract, that agreement of trust, brings into operation God's law and corrects its own self with little to no effort on my part. So now I tell you stories, and I show you how I use this, and how it puts you into the stillness of the resting place, and it puts you into the presence of the Christ, which is what you call the atonement, the Eucharist, the receptivity of God's creative influence, if you will, so that you can be in the living of God's kingdom, not in the death of a fallen kingdom. There's life in one and there's death in another. It's a death culture in the flesh. It's life in God's presence. So, years ago, I stumbled onto this. The story goes like this. There I was, suffering with an eating disorder. Okay? Now, the eating disorder, at first I tried to use human will. I said, I'm going to make a list and here's what I'll do differently and I can fight this thing, and I just got worse and worse and worse, because everything that the carnal mind comes up with is void of power. It has no truth in it, and there's no intelligence whatsoever back of it, because it's perceiving something God didn't create, and the proof of it is that it's outside of God's joy. because it's learning and yearning amiss. It's learning and yearning amiss. It's saying, well, here's my problem. Here's why I'm screwed up. Sorry, that dog don't hunt. And it's saying, here's the solution that I know is going to work. I'm sorry, but that dog don't hunt either. God is the solution, and God is always present, and God is all there is. So eventually, I got to the point where I'd have to go, binge and purge and all this crap, and after that experience, I would just lay there in my bed, and I would just say, I don't care what happens. I just want to be in this space. I just want to be in the allness of God. I just began yearning for that. Now, there were a lot of things that were happening along that time. I had a lot of responsibilities. For instance, at the time I was an exotic dancer, okay? Now, am I proud of that? Of course not. And you could say that never happened because that's in the dream, all right? But at the time, that was what worked for me, all right? So, these weekends would come and I'd have to go do these parties and dance and, make money and all this stuff. And there were times when I'd skip out on it. I had shows and bookings, and I would just lay there in my bed, and I would just in my heart, I would call out to God and say, I don't want to do this anymore. I can't do this anymore, God. Can I just be in your presence? Can that be just good enough? Can I just be okay just being in your presence? Do I have to perform all the time to be okay? Do I really have to chase after money? Do I really have to be an exhibitionist and show off my body and lower my self-esteem and go through all of these actions to make ends meet? I don't want to do any of it, Father. I just want to be in your presence. And so I'd blow off all these gigs and I'd follow that immediate moment where that joy was coming to me. And that joy was in the release of the tension of dielectric polarities. In other words, the good of that world was, hey, if I'm a good person, then I'll go do this party and everybody will be happy and I'll get my money and I'll be like another weekend down in the books, right? And if I was a bad person, well, then I would be, not doing that, and I would be engaging in binging and purging, and I would just be blowing off things and drinking alcohol and all the other things that I used to escape into. I was escaping. I was trying to escape life. What I was doing was I was actually recognizing the death culture itself, and I was struggling because my human reasoning was failing me. There was no answer to the unsolvable problem. Okay, the unsolvable problem was I had this addiction, I had this problem that wouldn't go away, and it was consuming everything around me. But there were these moments where I'd sit there and I would just yearn for God's presence. And I remember a sense of peace would come over me, and I felt just blanketed. Well, that was the presence of the Christ. And what it was the release of good and evil. And it was the total rest and receptivity to God's allness in that space right there. And you see, all I asked was, God, in this moment, can I please just escape into you? I'm tired of doing it through food and alcohol and other drugs, and I'm tired of, chasing the pleasures of this world and trying to make a name for myself and trying to, keep this perfect body going so I can make money. And, I was a slave to this world, one way or the other, whether it was on drugs this side or it was on being an exhibitionist on the other. So I had conformed. But in that moment, I would just surrender to God. And then I remember there would be this lashing of the tail, Where the F are you? You're supposed to be here, you son of a blah, blah, blah. People would just be like mad at me because I'd blow off the party. And then I would just refuse to pay any attention to it whatsoever, and I would stay in God's peace. I started staying in that presence longer, recognizing that it was okay for me just to sit in God's allness. I didn't have to do anything. I just had to reveal God's allness. And I knew this intuitively. So I just stayed there. And I let them all yell and squabble about and call me names and just really come down on me, and the world threw all of its evil at me and said it's going to take away all the good. And then, after a short season of doing that, I'd get a promotion. It was almost like the movie Office Space. It was the same dynamic that they show you in the movie Office Space. You see, his life sucked so bad. And, the story goes, he goes to this hypnotist, right? Which, hypnotist dies of a heart attack right then and there and leaves him in this trance, right? Well, in the trance, he's, I don't really care anymore. I don't think I want to go to work today. I think I'm just gonna do whatever I want, follow my joy. Now, if you want to know what it looks like in real life, the movie Office Space shows you exactly, as long as you know the spiritual teaching behind it, you'll know why you're doing it. But if you want to see how it's done, you watch the movie Office Space and you watch the movie The Man Who Knew Too Little, okay? Now, if you're really advanced, you can do sets and you can put yourself as the character in that movie and you can pretend that this is all just that movie. See? And you can walk through this movie and just carry out that characterization of you. Now, here's the big idea. In the movie, he just walks into the office late. He's like, but keep in mind, he's not doing it to dishonor anyone. He's doing it because he wants to be in the state of joy. Because the state of joy is where he feels life. Because that's where life is. Life isn't outside of the state of joy. So he now has entered life. And all of the dream around him is like, what? Like, they're all tripping out, right? But then he gets a promotion. And then he gets all of these things. He gets the girl. He gets all of these things, right? It's showing you in plain sight. That's how it works. The movie Yes Man also articulates this as well. What is he doing? He follows the joy of the immediate moment. And in the movie The Man Who Knew Too Little, he's just so ignorantly stupid that he assumes that everything that's happening to him is because it is some good unfolding for him because he's in the theater of life. And you see, what these things show you is that your attitude in the immediate moment toward life, you see, now is the moment of salvation. You don't have a history and you don't have a future. You are not there. There is only God that came into being. And you're supposed to be the bliss that God created. And that is how you know that you are in the creation itself. Otherwise, you're in another creation. You're in a false reality where the burdens will tax you out of existence. What do you think taxes are? They are the in plain sight, the power to destroy. Well, that's what they actually are. All of the rhetoric around it is just a bunch of useless word salad coming from the linear, logical, reasoning idiot mind. There's no other reason for taxes other than to destroy. That's what they do, and those who participate in that destruction ultimately bring that karma back to themselves and their family lineages get destroyed. Because when you commit rape, which is a forced performance, you see, now we'll get back to rape. Rape is a forced performance through deviation of manipulative exploitation, okay? It's a manipulative exploitation through a false governance, through false law. And when you use that to your advantage, it's called sorcery. Because you try to extract out of another the good that only God can provide. Then out of that forced performance that you create, you schedule upon yourself and your offspring the same. And that's how this game works. So when you realize that, the true way to set yourself free is to walk with God. Walk with God. Now, when I say with, I really mean like let God just be the only thing there. And surrender yourself to the fullness of God's joy. And what happens in that space, as I mentioned, is Spirit pops the bubble of the false dream that you've been experiencing, or it provides you with what you call the lesson that you need to know, and you discern it. And you may go through a little season of crying and, realizing that it's you and you that's really happening here, and that, oh my gosh, like, I really do need to learn this. I really do need to have more humility. I really do need to experience more patience. I really do need to see that there's only goodness in this world. See, God is saying, listen, more of me, less of you. How do you get there? You have to be standing in the center of your joy. There's no other way to get there. Nothing else works. Nothing else could possibly work. Everything else is a deception. Please don't fall for it. So, as I began realizing that these moments of just yearning for this moment to find God's allness, and I would just lay down and I would just drop all of the cares of this world, and I would just recognize that in God's allness there has to be all sufficiency. There has to be, like, in this moment, everything must be perfect because God is all there is. I just surrendered into that moment and just let that moment be the only thing that I was seeking. See, when you are absent from the body and present from the Lord, present with the Lord, that's what it means. The body of what? The body of material fiction, the body of this world, the fashioned form of ignorance, the body of ideas and opinions that make up the rule sets within this world of what you should and shouldn't do, the good and evils of this world. When you lay all of those things down and you aim your focus, you take the wolf of your unconscious mind and you put it completely gazing upon God's peace, God's joy, God's presence, and you merge back into the source. The electricity grounds back into source. The bliss returns home. Then what you'll find is God will start creating right through that moment into the next moment. That joy will bleed into the next moment. That peace will surround you, and don't leave that peace. Don't trust your lying eyes. Don't leave the peace. God is all there is. Right where there seems to be trouble, there is no cause because there's only God there. So I'm not deceived by these lying five human senses. Yes, they tell me a story of who I was and what I did and why I have to live this, crappy life, and why I'm stuck in this addiction and why I have to perform this weekend, and none of that stuff ever happened. There is no cause. Just like in the movie, all right, Office Space, you see, everyone. So just like in that movie Office Space, everyone around him said, oh, you're going to get fired. It's over for you. And what actually happened was completely different. Now, I want you to watch that movie. And I want you to recognize that he never left his peace until the end. As soon as he started leaving his peace, it all fell apart because he engaged in some things that were ultimately not of God, okay? He started to seek the good of this world, and that's how he fell back into the dream. They wanted to rob the place, and they wanted to steal money and all this. And you see, that actually, puts you back in the dream because you went and sought the good of that world again. So in essence, when he first sought the good that was in the present moment of just being in that space, everything was working well. But then when he made it about this world, thinking, well, I'm going to go get something from this world, he put himself back into the torment, back into the hell and the delusion of the five senses, and then everything started to fall apart again, right? Okay? And then at the end, he ultimately learns the lesson again, and he ends up getting a better life, okay? If you really watch that movie and you understand the spiritual dynamics that they're showing you in plain sight, and then you take on that upon yourself to be of that nature, then things will start to transform around you faster than you can imagine, because it's the recognition of God that unmasks itself and becomes the thing that's needed. It becomes the solution that you've been looking for your whole life. It becomes that lover that comes into your reality. It becomes that unexpected source of income that you never knew could be there, but yet you seemingly unlocked it. Like you got the cheat code in the Matrix, you just unlocked your fortune. Okay, now, this is all leading into the class, and by the way, you can probably get in. The class starts today, but if you're watching this video later and you missed it, you can still get in. The link is below. Just get in, catch the replay, start the class. But I'm doing the Master Money class. I don't want you to miss it. And this is the preliminary teaching for the Master Money class. This is day 1's lesson. And I'll be covering more stuff, obviously, in the class, but I'm really going to teach people how to be in the state of receptivity, because that is how you master all of these things. All right? And we're going to condition ourselves into that state of receptivity. Because, look, it's not my job to prosper you. No human mortal can teach you anything to prosper you. Only wisdom can prosper you. My job as your facilitator, as your trainer, as your minister, your counselor, spiritually speaking, is to get you to recognize the path. And then you step onto it. Hi there.
It could be a little warmer.
It could be. You just got to run those hills and it starts to get hot. Have a good day. So, here's the idea. As you embrace this way of living, which is counterintuitive to every logical human being out there, you may offend all of them, but I promise you, one with God is a majority. And if God is with you, then who or what can be against you? Really, this is how the game works. You have to have the courage to really lay down your life to gain life. And this is how you lay your life down. So that's what I want to share with you today. Watch that movie. And if you want to supplement it, watch the movie The Man Who Knew Too Little. Okay, I'll tell you some of the insights in that movie. So Bob Wiley, he's crazy. Like, he's a neurotic lunatic. He's in his left brain. That's what the left brain is. The left brain is a neurotic lunatic. All he is just a slightly more exaggerated version of what you'd call an intellectual. Okay, he's just an intellectual on steroids. Okay. Yes, think about it. These intellectuals, they know everything good of the world and everything bad, and they've labeled it all, and they live by all these rule sets, and it's just a prism of like mechanical movements that they end up succumbing to. They don't have any life in them whatsoever. That's why everything they create out of these scholarly educational systems that comes to the top of the pyramid on this planet, it's all toxic. The food's all toxic. The laws are all corrupt. Everybody running the show is all crooked. You see, this is all just the crookedness of this mind of this world. It has no logic, no truth, no intelligence, no life in it. So Bob Wiley is just an exaggerated version of that. He's a mental case. And so, yet, he was bound to that because of that mind, but yet his heart starts to come to life, okay? Actually, no, that's not The Man Who Knew Too Little. That's What About Bob. Sorry. What About Bob is another movie. You need to watch that one too. Okay, so What About Bob, Bob Wiley, okay, he is, it's so funny. It's just so funny. Synchronicities, I'll tell you about it. So, what about Bob? He comes to life, through the playful joy. He finds playful joy. Think about it. What happens in the movie? What actually happens is he finds playful joy with this family, and he's laughing with this kid, and he's like, he got the Tourette's, and he's screaming at the kid, and he's finding playful joy. He begins healing. Once he finds the joy, he found God's presence. And God's presence becomes his all-sufficiency. And God's presence begins to take over his life. And he lessens his grip of his intellectual, mental, agitated state of neuroticism. Okay? Now, in the movie The Man Who Knew Too Little, same Bill Murray character again, he, he's kind of this, works at Blockbuster Video, so he's obviously, they want to tell you that he's kind of dumb, right? That's like, he's dumb. Well, he goes to his brother and he gets in this thing called the theater of life. And so he's supposed to live as if this is a movie scene, but it becomes real. He's actually come into this place where the stakes are high, and it's actually a real thing going on. And he ends up saving the day like a superhero. But the whole time, he's just like, I get it. These people are robbing him. And he's like, all right, okay, stop. This is the part where I start crying. He goes, did you guys believe that? And they're looking at each other like, what the hell is wrong with this guy? Like, but see, He is only beholding each moment. Here's the magic. He is only beholding each moment as if everything is being orchestrated for his gain, for his good, for his good. Now, if you get these keys and you watch these movies, okay, now I'll tell you Yes Man. Okay, so Yes Man, the movie Yes Man, he stops resisting the moment. He stops resisting the moment through qualifying good and evil in everything that he sees. And so ultimately the magic of the movie Yes Man is that he took the power away of good and evil and he just began saying yes to the moment. And as he says yes to the moment, he allows for flow to come into his consciousness, flow. And as that flow comes in, the only thing that came into being was God's goodness. So that flow of good begins to come into his realm, to his world. Okay, obviously he loses his grip on it a little bit and then he self-corrects toward the end and he kind of finds his balance. But here are the keys here. Key number one. Okay, we talk about office space. Okay, he learns how to find the eye of the storm. He learns that following the fastest path to his joy is the secret. And he lives according to it. And the outer begins to change quite rapidly and elevate him. Okay, obviously then he seeks the good of this world and he loses it. You know, the Delilah spell, that's the story of Samson and Delilah. He gets his spiritual hair cut off, which means his power goes, his joy is gone. Then he's all of a sudden in trouble again. Then he goes back and he finds his power again. It's a moment-by-moment phenomenon. There is nothing happening out there. The world is a zero. You're living in a simulation. There's nothing but God. You're just playing an interaction between you and you. That's all there is. The second thing is, what about Bob? Bob Wiley's a mental, agitated nutcase. He's just an intellectual on steroids. He's in academia. He's one of these people. And so what happens is then he, all of a sudden, finds his playfulness. He finds his joy in the moment. And he finds his joy in the moment and he begins to live in that space and it becomes the transforming presence that takes away the neurosis. And he starts to become, filled with the power of God. Okay, he's wielding the power of God. Okay, and then in the next movie you have the man who knew too little. All right, so anyway, he's expecting that everything that happens moment by moment is the unfoldment of good. It's all happening for his good. And because he beholds the creation as that, now here's the magic of that. As I behold every moment as the only thing happening is the only cause is God's love coming into being, I strip the power away from the ignorant, false, lawless one of the material consciousness, and I bring about God's creation. I reveal God's kingdom. And then I'm always 2 steps ahead of everything because God is orchestrating everything. Now, and the last thing, yes, man, is that I stop qualifying everything in my human reasoning as having any validity whatsoever. And I start saying yes to life because it is the unfoldment of good in every moment. Now, if you watch these movies, okay, this is your week 1 assignment. Week 1, obviously I'm going to give a lot more in the class, but this is for all of you who don't take the class, or even if you do, this is your supplemental. You watch these movies and you begin to realize that I need to live according to this nature. If I expect supernatural mastery over my money, over my world, and gain dominion over all that is. Okay, now if you do this, then blessings unto you. And if you don't do this, well, then it was your choice. And maybe some other time, you'll decide that you really do want the allness of God. Take care.